Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar. This webinar is hosted, sponsored, and facilitated by Bowmans Uganda. We want to thank you so much for joining us. We hope you are well, and members of your family too. My name is Mercy Odu. I'm a senior associate at Bowmans Uganda, and this afternoon I will be your host for the next 1 hour. Welcome. My job is very simple. First is to thank you for signing up and attending this webinar. We do hope that at the end of 1 hour, it will be of value, to be worth your time, and it will be of value to your business in more than one way. We have titled this webinar, The Economy, Restructuring and Business Rescue in Light of COVID-19. And the context of it is known to each of us. It is the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. And by now we all have sight of the human cost it has had world over, and the ensuing effect it has had on economies world over, including Uganda. So this is the context to which we bring to you this webinar this afternoon, and to unpack of three very, very distinguished guests. However, before we get into our discussions, I just want to communicate a few housekeeping rules to guide us through our discussion so we can have a very fruitful and clean discussion. First is that we have three panelists this afternoon. Each one of them is going to have 15 minutes to make a presentation on an aspect of the topic of discussion today. While they do, we request that you will keep all your mics on mute so that there will be no interference as we go along. At the end of the three presentations, we'll have an opportunity for question and answer, where we'll have our panelists will attend to some of the questions that you'll put through. But rather than wait for the end of the discussion, we invite you to make use of the Q&A feed that appears on your screen. Type in your question, your comment as we go along at any time that it comes to mind, and our panelists will respond to your questions either in their discussions or at the end during the Q&A session. But do not wait for the end of it all. Just type in your question as it comes and we'll attend to it as we go along. Also, as we go along, we will run some poll questions. We invite you to please spare a minute of you to answer those poll questions. They're very simple. It'll just take you to answer a yes or a no question, and we'll appreciate your feedback. That said, and without further ado, I want to move right into the gist of our discussion. And I'm going to introduce our panelists who have been able to make it for our webinar this afternoon. Our first panelist is Dr. Fred Muhumuza. Dr. Fred Muhumuza is a renowned development economist, and he's also a lecturer at Makerere University. Dr. Fred Muhumuza is going to help throw more light on what the impact of COVID-19 has been on the Ugandan economy. Second off, we have Mr. William Kasozi. Mr. William Kasozi is a partner at Bowmans Uganda. He is an expert in banking and finance, and also an accredited insolvency practitioner. He has over 20 years experience under his belt, and so this afternoon he is going to be speaking to the topic about business restructuring and rescue in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. And last off, we have Mr. David F.K. Mpanga. He's also a partner at Bowmans Uganda, and David is going to speak to us about what now and what next in light of COVID-19. So thank you very much to our panelists. And without further ado, I am going to invite our very first panelist, Dr. Fred Muhumuza. Dr. Fred Muhumuza, good afternoon and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. Kindly just unmute your mic so we can hear you.
Good afternoon, Mercy, and everybody on this webinar. I hope you can hear me well now.
Yes, we can. Dr. Fred Muhumuza, thank you again. I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic is primarily a health crisis. and it's become a human tragedy in its own right. But we also know that it has had very far-reaching ramifications on the economies, all throughout the globe. But we want to focus on Uganda. We know that it has already had very far-reaching ramifications for our economy here in Uganda. As you make your presentation, would like to invite you to just give us an overview of what, in your expert opinion, has been the most immediate impact of this pandemic on the Ugandan economy. What does this have to do, and how does it fit into all the different sectors of our economy and the businesses that are represented on this call this afternoon? Thank you.
Thank you, Mercy. Good afternoon once again to everybody. I think, as you've rightfully put it, this began as a health problem, and what it does in the human body is to freeze the flow of oxygen in the body. And once the flow of oxygen is gone out, the body begins to die. Slowly, different components of the body die out. Now, I tried to find which economic model or imagination is closest to that flow. That will give us at least an impression of what has happened also to the economy, because the economy is also a living thing. As you can see on your slides, the economy is made up of those major components which would relate with the major organs in the body: the heart, the kidneys, the liver, the brain, the thing that really, and the lungs, the thing that literally COVID in the human body shuts down. And this is exactly what it has done within economies as well. It has clogged down those flows within the system. So the impact on the economy is, to begin with, the macroeconomic effect, that it is across all sectors of the economy, it's across all entities within the economy, it's across all the flows within the economy. You can see you belong somewhere, wherever you are and you're watching us, you will know you belong somewhere, and somewhere you are touched by any of those different components. Whether you are a household and all you do is to work for somebody, you are on top of the picture, and that somebody you work for is at the bottom of the picture. And that person pays you a salary, which salary is now either been cut to half, or you have been sent to home with half pay, and some people have been sent home with no pay. So that line is there and not there for some individuals. But also from the household side, you supply by consuming household items. And those consumers, because they are at home, because they are not earning sufficiently, the businesses are not able to sell. So even if we opened up the businesses and we did not restart the households, it means the business will have a problem, because they will not have anybody to buy up their thing. In the next slide, I will be showing you, but let's first skip to this, that consumer expenditure is actually 70%, 75% of Uganda's economy, Uganda's consumption economy. In the US, consumer spending is 70%. So consumer spending is quite critical for all of us, and we need to take note of that discussion to know that they are interrelated. In between those, you have the government. And the government literally collects taxes and provides certain services. Now, it is going to face a problem that businesses not working cannot pay certain kinds of taxes, because the taxes are related to their own working. Households, if they are not earning, they certainly are not going to pay those taxes. So government itself is going to be constrained, and we're expecting it to behave and scale down its appetite to spend. If it doesn't, it is going to have a big shortfall, and then we'll go borrowing. And where will it be borrowing? It's going to borrow from the financial markets. It's going to borrow from the financial sector. As you can notice, original designs did not expect government to borrow domestically. So there are no lines connecting government directly. Government is supposed to get taxes, which taxes should be coming out of households after households have saved. With the financial sector, they have generated their own money through farming, through individual businesses, and then they can pay the taxes. But now, once government breaks these protocols and goes into financial markets, and we know the Uganda government is planning to borrow 3 trillion in the coming budget, and it might even borrow more because the revenues will not come through as anticipated. That is going to begin the distortion of the market, and we need to be aware of that, that even as we restructure our economy, our businesses, we are restructuring within the broader spectrum of whatever else other entities are doing. The last part is on the left, where we're talking about the world economy. And the world economy, as you can see, links directly with households. They export their things which the world economy imports. Basically, you're talking about human labor. The people we are talking about remittances, that line is almost getting frozen in some cases. But similarly, the world economy imports from us, from the businesses. That line is also frozen for some entities like tourism. We are no longer selling anything to the world in terms of tourism. We are still selling things like coffee, things like flowers are not going. Kenya are just giving bouquets to the UK free of charge just to keep relations running, but at least people are still buying some foodstuffs from us. So that line is there, but it's not functioning as much. Now, the reason we are going through this is so that you can see where are you, where is your business, even as you restructure it. What is it that is on your side and what is it that is on the other side? I want to move to the next slide. And here we spend much, much less time on it. This is basically telling you what is the structure of the Ugandan economy, what it is like. And I just took the last quarter, which was available statistically using the Bureau of Statistics publication. This last quarter, you're talking about what was the economy like between October, November, and December of 2019. That is last year. You will see that agriculture is still 28 or 25% almost. But within agriculture, what is the major sector running in there? It's food crops. So literally, as long as we are continuing to eat, that food crop sector is going to continue subsisting as a live element. Livestock has had a big hit. The milk is not flowing. The meat is not flowing as fast as it should. Forestry is literally frozen. So those components of the economy, you begin to see what will work and what will not work. And it gives you an idea on where is my business? How will I survive in this kind of strike? Industry, as you can see, the bulk of it is manufacturing. All of it literally frozen, by and large. So 15% of this economy is not functioning as we speak, maybe just here and there. Electricity and water, thank God they are working. Construction is literally frozen. It's supposed to be 6.2% of our economy, but it is kind of frozen down. So you begin to see those ideas. And the rest of the services, as you can see them on that other slide. Let's move on to the next slide, please. This is talking about we need the money. As I told you, what is flowing in those other lines that we're showing is money. Money is flowing from one entity to another entity, doing certain things. If you look at final consumption expenditure, it's quite a big component, 76% of the final consumption expenditure. But the bulk of that is actually coming out, 75% rather, it's about 85%. The bulk of that is literally coming out of household consumption. So that's why it is important that those households are consuming. They comprise 75%, 76% of final consumption expenditure, which drives that system. And as we've said, COVID blocking our system has actually attacked us at that very central point. People are locked up in their homes. They are not working. They are not earning. They are hardly spending except on food. That kind of is a big mess to the economy. And you want to know, how is my business surviving? How are my consumers and what is happening to them? Because it's not going to be just you starting your business. It's going to be, are your consumers going to come back? Now, on the left panel, you will see where is government, where is the economy's money locked up. Net credit to government. Forget about that first one. Let's look at private sector credit. In that particular month of February 2020, private sector credit, the stock was about 16 trillion. But if you come down and put the two together, the stock of government treasury bonds and the stock of government treasury bills, they are actually more than the private sector credit. You're talking about 17 trillion locked up within government systems. Now that is a dangerous thing for us because that money is not available to stimulate the flows that I showed earlier. So I want to go to the last slide as I come to the conclusion. What are the key messages we are picking up here? Uganda is a very small economy. When the global economy goes under, we definitely are going to be taken down with it. You should not hear this thing that the problem is not for Uganda. The economic problem might even be worse than the health problem. It might amplify the health problem. We're a small economy. We are part of that global system. It will drag us down. Resolution of this is going to be internal dynamics. How do we stimulate our own internal demand? We must move money from these government bonds and bills, at least by avoiding fresh borrowing, so that the money can be left with the farms, households, and the businesses, which will eventually thrive back. And once they thrive back, then government will be able to find some taxes to hold up. So for me, the points are, how do we kickstart the household incomes? Even as you restructure your own personal business, you want to be saying, what is the economy doing? And that's my last slide there. That what you do, including, I mean, the bullet point number, second to last, what you do in structuring and restructuring your business is one side of the coin. The success of that process that you do inside your business is ultimately going to be depending on what is government doing on the other side, mainly through fiscal policy. Is government cutting down its expenditure so that you can leave you with some money, either by tax deferrals or by not borrowing, or even diplomacy to argue for you people, for us in the business sector, to restore some of these diplomatic lines. Because one of the things we know, COVID has made many countries want to operate individually, and it's going to take diplomatic circles to unclog some of those kinds of things. Now, with those kinds of things, people will be locking up their money in real estate. Because when you're not safe, as the president said, freeze, don't move. Now, most people don't want to freeze their money in the banks. They want to freeze it in real estate. So they will be seeing that even after real estate is slowing down, a lot of people want to dump their money into the real estate sector. They just want to keep it there and be able to recover it. I submit. Thank you very much for listening to me. Mercy?
4 minutes to go. What I've picked up from, thank you very much, Dr. Muhumuza, for your presentation. And just maybe before you go, I mean, the outlook is not very sobering. It's not very rosy as it is. It's quite sobering in the case that some commentators have predicted that we are going into a period where the world might suffer a recession worse than the one we experienced in 2008. Now, coming down to Uganda and what you have explained, that it comes down to the household and it has a direct bearing to government expenditure. I'm just picking up from the president's speech yesterday. What are some, in your opinion, what are some of the sectors that we might see flourish right now or in the near future in light of COVID, and what sectors do you think or anticipate might have a dip because of this pandemic?
The food and agriculture will definitely be able to move on because we're going to continue eating. So people in the food sector, either as farmers or those who are providing raw materials, inputs, those who are moving food around will continue to move. You can see most of our borders have been transformed into cargo vehicles now because cargo will continue to move. So you'll be able to see the food sector survive. Tourism, which is the big sector, and I think this is where we need a conversation with the president really to say, I don't mind some have lost, others have gained. I don't mind that some people are now making sterilizers, they are making soap, they are making some alcohol conversions. These are small entities compared to $1.4 billion you are losing out of tourism. So it depends on relative terms that which sector has gone out and which sector has come in. The sectors that have come in are very tiny. We have lost tourism and it's not going to come back for the rest of the year, mostly, because the global economy is not going to be able to sustain that. So we want to avoid that kind of situation of generalizing and zoom in. Which specific sector am I in and how is it going to be impacted? Schools, we may not see schools come back for a duration. There are partners in the world are beginning to say my schools will open in September, others not at all this year. So there might be some of those. So if you're in the business that relates to schools, education, you might be in for a longer haul than possibly a border rider who, the moment we open up, will be back. The taxi and buses, the moment we open up, they will be back. So it's going to be a personal thing to sit down and discuss. And this should also inform the restructuring people want to have with banks. Because you don't want to go to a bank in May to restructure, and then you realize you are wrong in July and you need to go back. Have a whole template of what your business is facing, how it will be restructured, so that you can go and have a candid, long-term conversation with the bank. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muhumuza, for your presentation. Some questions will be coming through the Q&A feed that are directed to you. Just take a minute and respond to them as we go along.
Okay.
So we can move on to our next panelist. Mr. Kasozi, I want to bring you in now at this point. Dr. Muhumuza has given us a very quick dive into how the economy looks like in light of COVID and how the near future also looks like. It's not a very rosy picture that he paints. If I am a business and I find myself and I'm constrained in one or another, and I find myself distressed for different reasons, what do I do? Do I just fold my bags and wait to die? What are my options? How do I even know that I'm in a place of distress?
Thank you, Mercy. I think that I can see we've got about almost 200 participants, and all of us in this webinar are either business people, or we're employees, or we are government, civil servants. But but somewhere we are all impacted by the economic doldrums that we seem to be facing. I'll start by just highlighting the question you said. What are the signs and symptoms? When I go to my doctor says, usually greets me matter-of-factly and says, "How are you?" It doesn't matter whether I say I'm good or I'm not good. The next question will be, what brings you here? Now, we have to look at what are the signs and symptoms that your business or your company needs a restructure or a rescue. And primarily we are looking at 4 things. The first, that we're looking at working capital. And in working capital, we look at a declining or negative free cash flow. We look at large contingent liabilities, unresolved near-term debt maturities. If you have facilities, revolver drawdowns, contracting vendor terms, meaning that the people who are supplying you are giving you shorter periods. Increases in accounts receivable aging, meaning your creditors, your debtors are taking longer to pay you. And increases in outstanding accounts payable. You are not paying people. On the financial side of that, typically the company will face inability to meet debt covenants. It will be unable to complete and file financial statements. Once in a while, you will see accounting restatements and repeated bank amendments, and then downgrades. If a company is rated, then you look at downgrades. Now, then on the profitability, it goes without saying that the EBITDA margin will be shrinking, and EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, debt service, and amortization. And you're likely to see going concern opinions in the financial statements, and then regulatory inquiries if you're regulated. It goes without saying that that company will also see employees leaving. It's within that sphere that I would like you to look at your business or your company and ask yourself, does your company require restructuring or rescue? If you answer to a bulk of those descriptions, then certainly your company needs restructuring. Now, restructuring and rescue. Of course, if the financial performance declines, you're likely to be defaulting on your debt, or you'll be at a significant risk of defaulting on your debt. In that circumstance, you have 2 options. You can, and the first is that you must raise cash. You raise cash through either you sell your assets, you make some operational improvements which may not bring a lot of change in the meantime, or you ask your shareholders to inject more money. The other option is you go back to your bank or the people you owe money, and you negotiate terms to reduce the payments, to postpone interest and principal, and so on and so forth. And if you are at that point, then clearly you are in distress. All these restructuring options can be done through 2 options. The first is a consensual option, which means that you go to your the people you owe money and say to them, look, let's sit down, have a conversation. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. You sit down with them, have a conversation, and you get an agreement. That mostly works if you have a few creditors and there are not too many small creditors, and those creditors, the debt you owe them does not primarily depend, their business is not primarily threatened by that debt. Or the other alternative is you can go to court through a court supervised process, such as an arrangement, administration, receivership, and liquidation. the key issues that you should consider to decide whether you should go to a consensual process or you should go through a court process, you must look at the comparative costs of either of the options to the company. It may be easier for you to talk to your creditors than to hire a lawyer, an insolvency practitioner, and petition court. But if that's possible, a cost is an important thing. But you must also gauge the level of cooperation you're likely to get from creditors to effect a restructuring plan. The other consideration is how much of your obligations are owed to banks. If you have a bank and you owe most of your debt to a bank and the bank is a major secured creditor, the bank may decline to participate in your restructuring plan. And then that will lead to the bank realizing the assets and you will indeed become insolvent. The advice is that you need to opt to the avenue that will maximize the value of the company's assets. And by so doing, give your company a chance to make it out of the process. The court supervised process is also available. You can go to court, and in the court, you can make what we call a deed of arrangement. The Companies Act permits a company to enter into an arrangement with its creditors, and then it can apply to court to summon a meeting of creditors. If 3/4 of your creditors agree, and that is 3/4 present and voting, 3/4 by value, they agree to the compromise or the arrangement, then it will be binding on all your creditors. The other option that you can look at is administration. You can go into administration. There are extensive provisions in the Insolvency Act that allow a company to go into administration. You would essentially appoint a provisional administrator, and then the provisional administrator would seek for orders from court. The thing though with the provisional administration is that there is something that is an overhang, I think, from our system, that typically our system, people have not taken on to provisional administration. It is, to my mind, only UTL that has taken that option. There is always the fear that if I go into court for provisional administration, then it will be taken that there is always a confusion between administration and insolvency. And there is always the fear that it will be perceived that your company is or has collapsed, and therefore that is why you've gone into provisional administration. But the real intention of provisional administration is to put a company in a position where it can be nursed back to health, and that is financial health, in an organized and protected manner, because you will then get an interim protective order, which will avoid you protection from creditor actions. And again, if you get a provisional order, there will be no liquidation that can proceed against the company. The provisional order will then also prohibit a receiver from being appointed over your assets, and it will also prevent secured creditors from enforcing security which they hold over your assets. What is important though is that you must act quickly. You should not, if you've used the criteria that we've looked at and you've determined that your company is in distress, the time to act is now. You must talk to your lenders to renegotiate your terms if you've chosen a consensual route. Talk to your suppliers to extend your supplier credit terms. Talk to your landlord for rent discounts. cut expenses, look at headcount, management pay cuts, and similar things. You may also try looking at something new, like looking at approaching your competitors and see how you can cooperate. But the important thing is that you must act fast. Beware that you do not become the boiled frog. A story is told of a frog that sat in cold water, and the water started to warm up, and the frog kept in the water until the water eventually heated up and the frog died. So do not let your business die. There are avenues, legal avenues that you can go through to restructure and rescue your company.
Thank you very much, William. I just want to, in another 2 or 3 minutes, does this advice work for a person running business, say, in the cottage industry? Because when you talk about, say, either the insolvency route or the litigation route, someone worries about the costs that are attendant to pursuing litigation or pursuing remedies under the Insolvency Act that might end you up on a litigation path. If somebody is worried about that cost, what is the best way out, or what is the best solution to their present problem?
If you're talking about a cottage industry or small business, it is most likely that it does not have big debts or it does not have big creditors. The most important thing is talk to the people you owe money and get into consensual arrangements with them. You will, of course, eventually hire a lawyer that will write you a document, at least that will be binding upon everyone that you have entered into an arrangement with. But those small cottage industries and the small businesses, the best thing is to look for the consensual approach as opposed to pursuing the court route.
Okay. Thank you very much, William. I think we take it from you that the time to act is now, and do not be the boiled frog. I think it's best to act now than be sorry much later. We're now moving on to our third and final panelist. But before we do, I want to thank you all for putting through your questions through the Q&A feed. Please do put your questions through, and the responses will come either in due course or during the Q&A session. And we'll be responding to those. Also, make sure that you participate in our poll questions, and we will really appreciate your time. David, I'm coming to you now. After what Dr. Muhumuza has painted about our economy and William sounding like the Ghanaian pallbearers, it looks like it's almost a bit gloomy for the future. And one of the things, the challenging aspects about the COVID-19 pandemic is the uncertainty it brings to every aspect of our businesses. What is the way forward? What do we do now? Because we don't even know how long we are going to live with this pandemic. What can a business do now, and what can they do, say, 3 or 2 years after now? What should somebody be doing and thinking about at this particular time?
Thank you very much, Mercy. And as our attendees will see on the screen, our tagline is the value of knowing. Bowmans' tagline is the value of knowing. In this webinar, we're trying to share the little knowledge that we have because, as Mercy, you have rightly observed, the global pandemic, the last large global pandemic we read about was the Spanish flu at the turn of the 20th century. This is the first global pandemic in the modern world as we know it. And there are very few people, if any, with living memory, certainly in active business, who have an understanding of what has happened and what may occur. So to the extent that we're here sharing the little knowledge that we have, we're trying to make the best of a couple of things, understanding the information that Dr. Muhumuza, whom I'll term the economic epidemiologist, the information he gave us, understanding the legal points that William, the intensivist, we use the medical analogy still, he works in either business intensive care, or unfortunately, if you don't make it out of business intensive care, then he works in the business mortuary. He's either a mortician or an intensivist, depending on how you approach him and at what stage in your business illness that you approach him. Mine is to be like the priest, to try and give hope and an understanding of the meaning behind all of this. And the points that I wanted to raise in my discussion really are as follows. First and foremost, we're in the middle of this, and it is as it is. We're not going to get out of it by regretting, by wondering why people ate pangolins or bats, or by wondering, is it man-made, was it deliberately released or otherwise. We're in the pandemic, it's happening. And the only way in which it's being resolved is if we get a cure or if we get a vaccine. If not, then we're going to be in lockdown of some sort or another, or we're going to have cyclical, what they call waves of this virus going through. This is what happened in the Spanish flu pandemic. 2 or 3 waves. It happened not with viral, but bacterial infection in medieval Europe with the Black Death, the bubonic plague. You had waves of populations falling ill, the fit surviving, but being left scared, being largely depleted. And what lessons can we draw from that? I think the first lesson is survival is 90% of the struggle. You need to ensure that your physical health, your staff's physical health is paramount and is protected. If you want to participate in the economy that Dr. Muhumuza is talking about, if you want to be sure that you can restructure that William has been advising about, you must be well. If you're dead, or if the majority of your business employees are not healthy or passed on, your business is going to die. It's as simple as that. So survival, physical fitness, health has to be paramount. And there are legal obligations around fitness and physical safety. So as an employer, as an owner of a business, as an owner of premises, you have legal obligations. Health and safety regulations exist. Health and safety obligations are placed on us by common law to ensure that we keep what the law terms our neighbor or people who work under us safe. Please expect that out of this pandemic, governments in Uganda and around the world are going to become far more focused on health and safety at work. We hear indications that there might be the loosening up of the lockdown. Everywhere in the world that the loosening up of the lockdown has occurred, it's come with qualifications on social distancing, on how many employees may be in a premises at any one time, how you need to provide for them in terms of ventilation, in terms of face masks, in terms of sanitization, sanitary stations, etc. So survival is very key. If you're going to make it through this COVID-19 struggle, you have to be thinking first and foremost about your survival. And if I may use another analogy, if it's a plane that's going down, we're always told, put your own oxygen mask on and then help those who are near you, even if they're younger or smaller than you. You need to be alive in order to be in the game. If life is a lottery, think about it in this sense. You have to be in it to win it. So the first lesson I would like to send everybody away from this webinar with is, how does my business survive? How do I even avoid all of these issues that business restructure requires, or insolvency? But in order to do that, you need to understand that you need to be alive. Your workforce needs to be alive. You need to take extra steps to make sure that they're alive, they're healthy, able to work, able to participate in whatever you might be doing. Second, we're in the middle of a big crisis. As we said, it's global. It may be a once in several lifetimes, it may be once in a generation type thing. If it is a crisis, don't make it a drama. Don't add to all sorts of big macro problems that Dr. Muhumuza was telling us about by becoming a problem yourself. Make sure that once in a hole, you're not digging further in the hole. So understand the risks. I think the first thing that a business leader needs to, and everybody actually needs to get under their belt, is an understanding of the risks that they face. Those things that you can't control and those things that are within your control. start mitigating the risks that are within your control. So when they talk about cash flow management, when they talk about reviewing your contracts to see which contract obligations are going to fall due during the lockdown period that you can't meet. If you talk about understanding your legal obligations to taxes, to the Social Security Fund, that's all understanding the risks that face you and mitigating those things that you can control. Reach out to the Uganda Revenue Authority, reach out to the NSSF, talk to your employees, understand the problems that your contract counterparties, the people that you supply, your clients are going through. Understand and make them understand why your inability to deliver. If you can understand your own risks and mitigate them, you're ensuring that this crisis does not now become a personal drama. In my language, there's a saying that, you know, drought is a global phenomenon. It just comes along and everybody suddenly realizes that there's no more rain falling. But hunger or famine starts household by household. It's the hunger or the famine is, the drought brings about the conditions that expose each household's capacity to save food, to have ensured that some food is kept for a dry or less rainy day, to have had a bumper harvest and stored enough of that bumper harvest, etc. So now we are in this middle of this crisis. You may find yourself without the buffer that you should have had, or without an understanding of how you need to develop it, how you need to navigate. My own view is, if you don't make a drama out of this crisis, if you don't run around like a headless chicken, or like Chicken Licken in my favorite, one of my favorite children's stories, saying the sky is falling down, there's going to be a tomorrow in many ways, especially if you survive, rule number one. So if there's going to be a tomorrow and you can mitigate the risks and you can task different people in your organization to manage the risks that you're running through, and you can reassure them and make them understand where you're going and why you're doing certain things in certain ways, you're, I think, halfway to getting yourself out of the situation that we presently are faced with. And in this not making a drama without a crisis, I think William's point about proactivity is very, very critical. Be proactive, don't wait for things to happen to you. If you know that you have to pay taxes, but you know that your cash flow does not permit you to pay taxes, don't wait for the URA to be upon you. Don't wait for the due date to be upon you. Seek out an expert in tax law, seek out an expert accountant, make a submission to the URA. If you know that you need relief from your landlord is also facing problems with their bank. They need to make some submissions about restructuring the facility based on an understanding of their cash flow. Talk to them well in advance of them making commitments that will turn around and create obligations to you that you can't meet because of your cash flow, so that they may make informed decisions. And it may become you together with others solving a problem. Because as I said, it's a universal situation. Everybody is in it. There's drought everywhere. But your household must now be reaching out to other households to say, look, can we find a way of mitigating our situation so that we don't get into famine, individual hunger situations, house by house. So I think ensuring that you don't make a drama out of this crisis, making sure that you're proactive, mitigating your risks, understanding and mitigating your risks is a very important point. And of course, it goes without saying that it's important to engage experts. Always engage experts in everything that you do so that you are well informed and your decision making is well informed and guided by law. Moving swiftly, it is always said that a good crisis should never be let to go to waste. I think it's a quotation attributed to Churchill. The world is changing and the world has changed. Another way of putting it, sorry, Matt, I've run over time.
Yeah, I'd like to just summarize your presentation in the next 3 minutes.
Okay, very quickly. There are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen, said Lenin. I think it's two sides of the same coin. We are in a situation where a lot is going to change. The way technology is used is changing. The way a lot of acceleration is happening. This is a history accelerator, if we put it this way. Find ways of making your business relevant to what's coming, not more relevant to what has been. If you can, look for ways of merging with other businesses. If you can, look for ways of acquiring other businesses. If other people are letting off their talent, recruit that talent. If you're in a position to get into a joint venture, get into that joint venture. If you're in a position of securing bigger market share because of disrupted supply lines from your competitors, or imports have been squeezing you out, now is your time to fill in that space. Lastly, if it will come out eventually, it'll better come out immediately. This is urging proactivity, urging proactivity, but also making you understand that the main thing must always be the main thing. Don't wait for things to happen to you, happen to things. Because as Rosbeth Moss-Kanter said, change is disturbing when it is done to us, exhilarating when it is done by us. COVID has caused us to get into a certain space and we're unhappy. It's just the way it is. Now that we're there, please try and find ways of making sure that you're managing the changes that COVID is imposing on us. I think that in the many ways that we are all finding out new things, we stand by our clients to help them navigate this space. If you need to be reviewing board charters, memorandum and articles of association, if you need to be setting up new businesses, if you need to be walked into the intensive care in terms of insolvency, all those things we're here to do. If you keep these 4 or 5 things in mind, I think that you will come out on the other side and we shall be winning together. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, David, and thank you very much to all our panelists. I'm going to ask that we unmute the panelists and mute their mics so we can run through some questions that have been sent through very quickly. I don't know if Dr. Muhumuza is still there. William, this one goes to you. Somebody is concerned that at the risk of shutting down businesses through insolvency proceedings, are there any recommended modes of rescue which one can resort to rather than going for the overkill? You can just note that down. There's another question directed to you, William, that the government has come to advise banks and financial institutions to give some sort of grace period with regard to loan repayments, but the banks are reluctant to do this. What's the best way to navigate this position? I think the question is generally around how can borrowers engage their bankers to work around their loan repayment periods. David, a question that was directed to you by an advocate who is also part of this call is, how can advocates stay afloat in light of COVID-19? With all the changes that it's coming through with, I'll just sample so many others. This one was directed to Dr. Muhumuza, but I think, William, you can best answer it. In the incident where valued customers cancel orders due to the COVID-19, should it be solved through litigation or negotiations? I think you can handle that question best. Let's see. Dr. Muhumuza, I don't know if you can hear us. A number of questions are directed to you. There is a concern around when and where the government is going to hand down a stimulus package to help certain sectors of the economy, and in case it is, what sectors do you think those might be? I don't know if you have a clue of that information. So William, I'll give you 2 minutes to just respond to some of those questions, and we'll get to David and later Dr. Muhumuza.
Okay, on the restructuring and banks, I'm aware that the central bank has issued a guideline to allow banks to restructure loans for a period up to 12 months. But the central bank has also given the banks the discretion to decide the criteria which they will use to restructure according to their own credit policy and prudential norms. Now, restructuring is not an end to itself. So you must, if you're approaching a bank to restructure your facility, there must be some fundamentals that you have to fulfill in order that you may be eligible for restructuring. You should show, I don't have the cash flows now, but these are the measures that I'm putting in place, and I hope in 12 months I will have the cash flows. You must put in place, I've lost these customers, but these are the measures I am taking in order that I may be able to acquire new customers and drive up my numbers. So restructuring itself is not an end, but it's a means to put you back on a recovery road. Otherwise, we may have the situation in the 90s in Japan. They had what is called zombie lending. Zombie lending, essentially, during the financial crisis, the banks were lending to entities that were insolvent and could not and had no plans of recovering. So the question is, to answer the questions directly, it is not automatic that you will get a restructuring. You must demonstrate to the bank that you will be able to take advantage of the restructuring in order to pay them. On the issue of insolvency, whether you should go to insolvency, I think that insolvency is not for everyone, and it's the final point. You should start off, as I said, with consensual arrangements. Try and talk to your creditors, go to your landlord, ask for a discount. If you've been paying for rent for 3 months in advance, ask to pay monthly. If you've been, I'm sure a landlord who's got, let's say, several shops or several rental units will consider and say, look, rather than have this unit empty, I will take a person who pays me monthly. Talk to your suppliers, talk to your employees if you have to talk to them. So that's where you should start before you go to court. Insolvency is the last thing. If you petition for insolvency, it means you're unable to pay your debts, and it means that company is at an end. Lastly, you talked about there's a question of valued customers who cancel contracts. You'd have to look at the specific provisions of the contract. Some of the contracts, you've got a deposit that is paid, and the contract says, if you don't perform, I will retain the deposit. Your remedy may lie in retaining the deposit and letting that go, rather than keeping the deposit and then wanting to spend more money trying to pursue this customer. It may be a machine that the customer no longer needs. So I think that you need to try and look at mutual ways of agreeing to resolve that dispute, other than trying to go to court. You'll be in court for another 2 years, believe me.
Thank you, William. And I think the previous questions was centered around the borrowers. There is a question here that is coming from the banking end. In case the president does have put in place a moratorium for paying back these loans, banks are concerned, how will banks remain liquid enough in order for money to circulate through the economy? Just in 1 minute.
That's going to be a tough thing. I know that it's something in consideration, but it's going to be a tough thing. There are a couple of things that are at play at the moment. Because of the lockdown and the decline in business and everything has stopped, people are not paying rent. The owners of the buildings, which have been used as collateral in the banks, are losing value. So it is most likely that in a couple of months' time, the property prices will fall. So if property prices are falling, which means that the ratio of coverage of security that is being held by the banks is also falling. So it is not enough to give you a payment moratorium when the bank is holding on to security whose value is falling. So there will have to be a combination of things that will have to be done. If there is a moratorium on payment, something will also have to be done on the capital of banks, because you cannot at the same time ask banks to stop collecting the money, and on the other side you are enforcing their capital requirement. So the capital requirements will have to be relaxed, and so on and so forth. So it will be a combination of things that will have to be done.
Okay, thank you very much, William. There are a number of questions that have come through directed to Dr. Muhumuza. I just want to let the people that put through those questions know that Dr. Muhumuza has had to step out of the call. He's, as you can imagine, a person on demand right now, so he's had to step down to attend to another call that he had to take on. But we promise and undertake to respond to all your questions that have come through by email. We'll return answers to your questions by email. We intend to close this webinar right on time. So I'm going to ask David to come in and answer the questions that have been put through to him through our Q&A feed, and in about 4 minutes, so we can close at exactly 4 p.m. Hello,
Running
David.
very quickly, Mercy. Yes, I'm here. Running very quickly on to the question around how will advocates stay afloat in this time of uncertainty. This is a very good question because it focuses on the fact that we advocates run businesses. The business of advising people is a business in and of itself. Legal practice has a business aspect to it. So the advice that we're giving to businesses in general actually also applies to law firms in many ways. Law firms must find their ways of survival in keeping their staff and partners alive and healthy. We must find ways of ensuring that we don't make a drama out of this crisis as advocates. And in also looking at how we advise our clients, because we're going through problems and advising on things that we've not seen before. Perhaps our training as advocates puts us in very good stead. What do I mean? The common law is a concept that we understand where we use precedents, the use of stare decisis, to determine matters that seemed never have arisen before, but we use old cases to determine new situations. What does that mean? It means you look at principles in various situations, extract those principles and apply them to new situations, factual situations as they arise. So we may not have precise laws, we may not have precise regulations, we may not have precise judgments, but as advocates, we need to be able to pick up essential principles and apply them and second guess what courts will find, what tribunals may find, what administrative authorities may find, and be able to advise our clients on the way forward. To the younger advocates, many people at this time may find that they need the counsel of older and wiser advocates. I think it's been observed in other crises around the world, the global financial crisis and the like, that in times like this, there is a sudden shrinkage of the kind of work that the junior lawyers do. I would like to make them, to reassure them and make them certain that this doesn't last for a long time. Soon the things that have created the crisis or that have been thrown up by the crisis are resolved, they become commoditized, and as a result, work that trickles down all the way to the bottom of the learning curve comes in, and the younger advocate also gets an opportunity to start practicing again. So don't fear and think, oh my God, the land office is going to be closed forever. I don't have an opportunity to make work from registration of transfers, etc. These things are cyclical. There's a certain kind of period of pinch when that goes, where we just need to be guided by wisdom and one or two guiding points of navigation. But once we generally set the boat in the direction that it needs to be moving, we should be all right.
Okay. Thank you very much, David. Thank you, William and Dr. Fred Muhumuza and Abzansha. I want to say thank you to all our participants who have engaged us on the Q&A feed. The questions are really many. Most of them were directed to Dr. Muhumuza, who unfortunately is not here to answer them, but we undertake to send answers to your questions by email. We have all your details, so we'll respond to your questions by email. We promise to keep this webinar short and sweet and keep it within 1 hour. There is so much that can be discussed. Somebody here said William needs to unpack his presentation, and I agree. There's so much that goes into business restructuring and rescue, and we probably will have another opportunity to do this, but we have to just keep this one into our time for now. We want to thank you all again for signing up. We want to thank you all again for making time for this webinar. We hope that we have met all, if not some of your expectations. In case there is any other issue you want us to deal with, do drop us a message, drop us an email. We will have something in the near future to respond to all your comments and all your responses. But from myself, thank you very much for coming on to our webinar. We appreciate your time and we appreciate your commitment. Thank you to our panelists, William, David, and Dr. Muhumuza. From me and the team behind the scenes, we want to say thank you and have yourselves a very good afternoon.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.